Hey everybody, it's PartyElite, and today we're taking a look at Star Wars Zero Company, the upcoming turn-based tactics game set in the Star Wars universe, developed by BitReactor. Though this is a newly minted studio, the people that work there have some serious pedigree in the genre, so I've been excited for this game ever since it was announced as a yet untitled project, and now that it's less than a month away from release, I figured it'd be a good time to do a bit of a deep dive into what we can expect. Just a heads up that this video is based on information that's publicly available at the time of writing, and isn't the result of any time spent playing the game with early access or anything like that. I just want to be very clear on that before we begin. Now, with all that said, and with timestamps down below to jump around as you'd like, let's begin. The setup. Being a Star Wars game was the first and most obvious thing to pique my interest, but it really is the specifics of the setting that started to seal the deal for me, especially some of the stuff that was revealed further along. First up, in my opinion, the Clone Wars is a very interesting time period in the more familiar Star Wars lore, but concentrating on the tail end of it with a focus on grounded, covert operations feels like a particularly excellent choice. It makes sense in the context of the genre, where smaller squads working together in tighter quarters with a limited but powerful arsenal makes for the most fun as they participate in a variety of mission types ranging from sabotage, rescue, and retrieval missions to classic combat-centric engagements. The devs have already said that these kinds of missions will take place across a dozen unique planets, many of which will be familiar from other games, the Clone Wars series itself, and other movies and shows too. But it'll be nice to revisit some of these locations in a different time period than what we've previously seen. Beyond that, you'll be visiting over 150 other planets across the Star Wars galaxy with operations, these being smaller events and opportunities that don't see you deploy on the battlefield, but reap rewards and take on risks from afar instead, but more on that later. This will be the most expansive representation of the setting in a video game yet, if I'm not mistaken, and I'm really excited to say that the story is being written by the narrative lead on both Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order and Survivor. Things are in good hands here as far as I can tell, putting the player in charge of a crew of misfits and mercenaries based out of a hangar in the rings of Kafrene, tasked with investigating a separatist-aligned cult, the Infinite Coil. You'll be playing specifically as a new character in the universe, former Galactic Republic military Captain Hawks, who will be fully customizable, allowing you to choose their gender, voice, class, physical features, and even species. And though they'll need to be present in all story missions, side missions can be tackled without them, allowing for tactical and strategic flexibility without sacrificing a potentially well-written protagonist. But that's enough about the setting and the premise, I think. Let's turn our attention to the battlefield. Handcrafted and unforgiving. As with almost all games in the genre, Star Wars Zero Company has a strategic layer and a tactical layer. And before we talk about the strategic layer, from where you choose which missions to take on, customize your squads, and all the cool ideas the devs have on those fronts, I want to highlight some of the particularly interesting decisions made for the tactical layer. This is a turn-based tactics game after all, and it will live or die based on how fun it is to actually put boots on the ground. As mentioned earlier, there are about a dozen planets where you'll actually deploy to take on a variety of missions and mission types. While some missions are directly tied to progressing the game's storyline, other side missions will allow you to gather important resources like credits, materials, and intel that we'll talk about later in the video. They'll also allow you to secure upgrades to your headquarters and develop the relationships between the members of your crew in the form of bonds. They'll come with risks as well, of course. Any injuries accumulated on these missions, story or side, can result in reduced performance and even death. What I find particularly interesting is that the developers are opting not to use procedurally generated maps for these side missions, instead using handcrafted maps across the board and only randomizing the enemy presence and positioning at the start of a mission based on how far along you are in the story. And it's doing this without any fog of war, which means you can see enemy positions across the board right off the bat. I'm curious to see how this feels to play, not only knowing exactly where the enemy is right from the beginning of a mission, but also with the handcrafted maps. Will it make sense that you're revisiting the same location multiple times, for example, or are there so many handcrafted maps that you'll rarely double up over the 30 to 40 hours of playtime? Either way, handcrafted maps certainly have a lot of pros. For one, they allow for more specialized visuals and environments, but beyond that, they allow a designer to build something specific with unique ideas, like entrenched positions that only make sense in certain ways, or unique approaches to those entrenched positions, so on and so forth. They also allow players to get more familiar with the various battlefields to potentially feel more comfortable exploring alternative ways to tackle them in multiple playthroughs. I'm a fan of procedural generation and handcrafted maps both. They can both be done in engaging ways, and I'm looking forward to seeing how Zero Company pulls this off. Apart from these handcrafted combat areas, story missions will also include real-time third-person exploration to go along with the turn-based isometric combat sections. Usually this allows a player to approach the same combat scenario from different angles, and I'll be curious to see if it's the same here. Either way, every mission can be taken on with a squad of 4 operatives, and while you can typically choose the 4 out of the entire crew you've assembled over the course of the game, story missions will reserve 1 slot for Hawks. On the battlefield, all characters will have access to 2 key resources every turn. Action points that they spend on an individual basis to either move or perform actions like shoot, throw grenades, or use the Force, and advantage that they spend from a pooled source shared between all of them used to activate special abilities or ultimates available to major characters. While some games separate action points and movement points, combining them like this means a player needs to choose whether to focus down on an enemy from where they're standing or destroying their cover, or potentially spending a whole turn just getting into position, either pushing into cover themselves, getting into range, or otherwise flanking an enemy or securing the high ground for the advantages it provides. When firing at the enemy, or when they're firing at you, hit chances are determined by whole or partial cover, flanking, range, and the weapon being used. So positioning plays a key role here, especially since the game uses an I go, you go system where each side moves all their units at once rather than alternating turns or using an initiative order system where you might go back and forth. This means that somebody that's caught out of position can very quickly end up in a lot of trouble. This is especially true in a game like this, where cover can be destroyed and the environment itself can be used to cause damage. Now, these are all fairly par for the course in the genre, but there are 2 particularly interesting twists on the familiar. For one, the devs have mentioned that they're taking steps to ensure that the Overwatch ability isn't a catch-all solution. Many games in the genre naturally encourage players to overuse this ability that has characters open fire on an enemy that enters a zone under their Overwatch, and while the devs think that using this ability to slowly advance down a dangerous area is a viable approach at times, they want to discourage it being the solution in all scenarios by using some of the different mission types where being slow and methodical works against the player. I'm curious to see how this actually feels in action. The other particularly interesting twist here is what happens when a specific Force-empowered enemy unit dies, at least according to a PC Gamer article from a few months ago. They transfer their life force over to an ally of theirs, applying buffs. These buffs stack across multiple dead allies, and if one such unit gets too many stacks on them, they go berserk, turning into a bit of a mini-boss. This makes combat different than the norm, where focusing down and eliminating individuals is almost always the priority. Here, you'll instead want to whittle down a bunch of enemies to prevent a full health enemy from being the one that goes berserk partway through combat. It is a fun twist to the usual for sure. I'm left wondering how many other twists on the usual we're going to see here when you consider all the factions involved beyond the cult. Battle droids, droidicas, various syndicates, and mercenary factions. There's so much potential for these interesting twists and turns on familiar systems and mechanics, and the fact that we have this one particular one revealed to us already has me very excited for what else the devs are cooking. But let's set the wondering aside for now and leave the battlefield to take a step back and look at the people participating on them and how they get there. Let's take a look at the squad, custom and curated. The heart and soul of a turn-based tactics game are the people you send into missions and lead through the fray. Picking them, arming them, customizing them, and seeing them make it out against all odds is some of the most captivating stuff in my humble opinion, and it sounds like there are some great ideas here to tap into all of those feelings, many of them familiar to genre veterans. First up, it's worth knowing that you can have up to 20 operators at your headquarters at any given time, though you start with a maximum of 7, a number that'll grow over time as you accomplish story missions and make progress. Of these, you can only ever take 4 onto the field, as mentioned in the previous section, and there are naturally a number of factors that determine which set you'll want to take with you on any given mission. For one, Hawks, the protagonist, is a necessary inclusion on story missions, reducing your number of custom slots down to 3 for those specific missions. Otherwise, there are other named characters that have unique abilities that they can tap into using advantage, or even unique classes that unlock all sorts of opportunities. If you want to take a Jedi onto a mission, for example, twirling two lightsabers and force pulling and pushing people into overwatched lines of fire, you have to take Telrea Vokos, the Jedi Padawan. Similarly, there are 3 other character-specific classes, called exotic classes, like this: the Mandalorian Warrior, Clyde Kullervo, Astromech, and an as-yet unknown 4th. Astromech is actually a bit of an odd class too, beyond just being an exotic one. It allows you to custom build the droid for the purposes you determine, and while the other exotic classes are uniquely tied to an individual, as in there is just the one Jedi Padawan in the game, the Astromech class can be applied across multiple Astromechs, ranging from R2, R3, and BR1 series droids, and you can even have just a squad of 4 Astromechs if you so choose, which, honestly, sounds like a fun time. But back on topic. This is just one determining factor when it comes to building out a squad for a specific mission. Do you want these specific exotic classes on the field? And if so, you better bring the specific characters along with you. Then there are the 8 other standard classes that both bespoke and randomly generated characters can come in with: Assault, Heavy, Sharpshooter, Soldier, Scoundrel, Gunslinger, Scout, and Medic. These classes all have unique purposes, alongside unique abilities and synergies to exploit, like the Medic using a combat stim to heal and buff the damage output of an ally is one thing, but specifically working with a Gunslinger in that way gives a huge burst of damage. Or having a Scoundrel identify weakness on an enemy to ensure the next hit that lands will be a critical is great, but following that up with a shot specifically from your Sharpshooter is even greater. But abilities aren't just tied plainly to class. Multiple characters of the same class can specialize in different talents that give them a couple special abilities specific to said specialization. And classes aren't the only determining factor anyway, nor are the class synergies that you might look to take advantage of from time to time. Bonds, as in personal relationships, play a major role in sending people out together as well, providing benefits on the battlefield when bonded characters work together, especially when their bond is maxed out. While bespoke characters will have backstories that are at times intertwined, both they and randomly generated characters will be able to develop relationships based on actions taken and differing ideologies between them. Completing missions and operations together will boost the relationship between participants. One squad member healing another will do the same, so on and so forth, and bonds can actually deteriorate over time as well. Keeping people working together is a core part of the gameplay here, and there will be dilemmas from time to time where you'll have to make decisions that your operators will opine on, potentially strengthening or weakening the bonds between them, and also impacting their approval of you and how you're running the operation, potentially resulting in their departure during specific narrative moments. This isn't the only way characters part ways with the outfit, of course. Permadeath is a thing, and if an operator accumulates multiple injuries, they will die. This applies to bespoke characters as well as randomized ones. If Telrea dies, you will no longer have access to a Jedi Padawan for the rest of the campaign. The only exception to this rule is Hawks. His death is mission failure, since he is you. But everybody else can die, and the story will go on. This really raises the stakes, especially since characters will be impacted by the loss of people that they have good bonds with, and if that's not enough, you'll have the option to customize the randomly generated characters both visually and otherwise, giving them custom names to mourn over when they get gunned down in a hail of blaster fire. What's more, as you make progress with individual operators, you'll be able to upgrade them by spending a resource gained through completing missions and operations and building relationships between characters. These focus points are spent on a focus tree, a tiered grid with multiple tracks and nodes where nodes represent active abilities, passive bonuses, and upgrades to existing talents and abilities, with options here determined by an operator's class and specializations, each with their own focus point costs to unlock. So, the loss of an operator is also the loss of access to these upgraded abilities and options on the battlefield unless you have somebody else that you've been training up to take their place in such a scenario. The huge variety of classes with 10 different species and named as well as randomly generated characters will make for a very fun time on and off the battlefields, and what's more, there are other characters that staff the Den and its activities too. Bennick Halloran, the Republic Intelligence Officer, Runa Blask, running operations and finance, Nish Renark, running the armory and black market connections, and Mevo or M3VO, your pilot and medbay operator. Again, with the writers we know to be at the helm, I feel confident that these characters will be well written and enjoyable partners in crime. But that's not all there is to this strategic layer of the game, of course, so let's go ahead and dig a little deeper to discuss the Den, a massive strategic layer. The strategic layer is what ties together all your activities across the countless planets of the setting. This is where you'll return between missions to level up your operators, customize them and their weapons, and plan for the road ahead by not only picking and choosing what to tackle next, but also recruiting additional operators and committing upgrades to the Den itself. Hidden away in the rings of Kafrene, the Den is home, and it brings a slew of mechanics for you to engage with as well. First things first, the holotable is the key centerpiece here as the tool through which you interact with the world beyond the Den. You'll be able to see what's going on across the over 150 planets I mentioned earlier, in particular having operations brought to your attention as opportunities to secure some sort of advantage or resource. These are potential encounters happening across the galaxy where you don't need to deploy a full squad, but can instead get away with sending just 1 or 2 operatives to take on a smaller task that's only available for a limited amount of time, disappearing forever if you let it go by. They cost intel to perform, a resource gained through the completion of tactical combat missions and through exploration during story missions, and they will always have consequences for success and failure alike, from unlocking side missions and taking on injuries to longer-term results like forging alliances, preventing the enemy having access to particularly powerful equipment or tools, or acquiring contacts for future use, or even narrative moments with companions that could make or break bonds or even result in their departure. Operations are a great way to add to the espionage vibes of the game, and though they are almost entirely optional, they'll be worth taking on for those aforementioned advantages and potential additional resources to use for upgrades to the Den. There are also some operations that are particularly important called crisis missions. These are also time limited, and their completion is again particularly important because letting them go uncontested will unlock massive permanent benefits for the enemy. These are things like shutting down enemy R&D before advanced equipment is deployed across the organization, and I think it's a very clever way and believable way, in fact, to apply pressure on the player while also ensuring multiple playthroughs can end up feeling different based on choices made in what to tackle or not. You need to be very careful about how you spend your intel then, and who you assign to the various operations laid out before you, since you only have limited access to both types of resources. As I said earlier, you can do as many operations as you'd like, provided you can afford to with the amount of intel you have, and then you can engage with a mission that sends you into the turn-based tactical engagements of the game and progresses time by a cycle, furthering progress and revealing new operations or the consequences of those you've taken on previously. So, missions are the big moment per cycle, and as mentioned earlier, there are a few key mission types ranging from sabotage, rescue, and retrieval missions to the classic combat-centric engagements. Missions and operations are both spread out across sectors of the map, and completing them increases your influence within the sector they're situated in, with increased influence providing access to unique sector-specific Den upgrades, weapon mods, and even contacts. Again, this all just adds to the feeling of running a covert operation across a massive expanse, and I absolutely love the sound of it all. But beyond the holotable, there is a lot more for you to do here. As mentioned before in detail for one, you'll be able to recruit operators at the Den, and should they accumulate injuries through missions and operations, the med bay will be at your disposal to help them heal. This will cost credits, of course, but they'll be well worth spending as injuries persist between missions, and if you accumulate 3 on an operator, they permanently die. My understanding is that these injuries also cause debuffs if they haven't been treated before diving into a following mission, and using a medbay bed heals injuries over a cycle, while back-to tanks provide instant recovery. You can see how cycles play a very important role in determining how things progress. They'll heal operators, they'll activate new operations, they'll give you access to additional missions, so on and so forth. Now, we've already talked about how customizable these operators are. The den is where you'll be able to actually partake in all of that customization. But moving on from operators, their equipment can also be customized. This includes cosmetic armor customization to set even your clone troopers apart, but it also includes more mechanical options like modifying weapons at the armory. Every weapon will have a set number of customization slots across the 4 weapon types: long arm, repeater, rifle, and pistol. They'll all have their own strengths, weaknesses, and specific purposes, further enhanced or tweaked by said modification slots and what you put in them. Barrels, cells, scopes, and stocks can all impact weapon stats in various ways, from changing their maximum range to their crit chances, their damage output, and much more besides. I'm very curious to see how inventive and creative players can get with the tools that are provided. Now, if mission loot isn't giving you what you need, you can also deal with the black market traders to try and secure them instead, though that'll come with a cost, of course. The upgrade facility, meanwhile, comes with limited slots and a variety of options to choose from. The droid bay, for example, allows you to manufacture astromechs to take on missions. You'll have access to weapon upgrades that provide team-wide benefits and much more besides, but these all take time to build, once again making cycles an important thing to keep in mind, and additional slots need to be unlocked over time through progress. The den will naturally also have a memorial where you can look over a fallen operator's legacy, but you can of course also take a look at your living operators in further detail, their stats, their bonds, their opinions, and much more besides. And if you'd like to take a look at Star Wars Zero Company in more detail, don't hesitate to subscribe to this channel, folks, as there's going to be plenty more to come. But that about wraps it up for today's video, and I'd love to know what's got you most excited for the game as well. There's plenty to talk about already, and much more to find out very soon. But it's all looking very thrilling, and I cannot wait to kick off a run on the channel too. If you'd like to see that happen, go ahead and hit that like button and let me know with a comment down below. But otherwise, as always, a massive thanks goes out to all of the channel members and patrons who've been supporting the channel on a monthly basis. Y'all keep us alive and running smoothly. And of course, a big ol' thanks goes out to each and every one of you for watching. Until next time, cheers.